Steve's back on again. This time Steve is going to talk about some website accessibility issues and solutions.
This is with another hat on. I work for a company called Techstick. Ignore the numbers have gone all weird on this thing, I don't know why. And that's what I'm going to talk about, of what accessibility is about and why you should do it. So if you have web accessibility, what it really means is inclusion. I won't go into the depth of the things, you can read them at your own leisure, but it's basically making a website should be usable by any user, whether they're disabled or not. And that's what it boils down to. And then we have usability, where a website should be very easy to use, and the line between the two is becoming much more blurred. So usually a good accessible website will be a usable website. If you look at the number of internet users, somewhere between 18 and 22% will be visually impaired by some means. So 18 to 21% of 2.1 billion users is a lot of users as the internet market grows. No, I'm fine. So in the past, the main reason that people have done accessibility is they've been driven to with a stick, because they need to, they've had compliance officers or compliance people, and they go, we need to be accessible, do it. They haven't really thought why they're doing it. If you actually look at accessibility tools on websites, you've got an increased audience, but even for visually impaired users, accessibility tools actually get people to spend more money on e-commerce sites and things like support sites where you've got lots of technical documentation. People who actually or read or listen to the documentation, if there's text-to-speech on the site, will actually go through that documentation on the site rather than calling a call centre. And we've got experience of an e-commerce site that sell things like laser printers, and they had a 10%, 20% reduction in call volumes the day after they installed the accessibility software. Wrong button. So there are sticks, and most countries, well, all European countries definitely have disability discrimination legislation. It came out of the EU-Europe 2002 accessibility doctrine, but most countries actually have something. In fact, the UK has reasonably strict. Australia has incredibly punitive DDA legislation, but they've actually decided not to implement it for small sites. But if you're public sector, you get severely spanked if you don't do anything properly with it. So if you look at the UK, there's quite a few disabled people in the UK, and the UK has got the original DDA, which came out before the European legislation, which was in October 99, and then the DDA of 2005 actually stated that all websites providing public services must make reasonable adjustments to ensure that the services they provide online are equally accessible to disabled internet users as to other members of the public. So that is actually in law, and every site out there has to make reasonable adjustments. Now, the trouble is, what is reasonable adjustment? And that hasn't actually been defined. So if you're a one-man band offering a personal web page, reasonable adjustment probably means you've done nothing. If you're a public sector organisation, it means you can go to court if you don't do something. and then there's actually, in the code of practice, there's specifics in there as well. In the US, they've also got various DDA legislation, which is becoming prohibitive. There's the ADA General Rule, and then there's Section 508, which came out of Congress. And in the States, Target.com was sued by the National Federation of the Blind, and a nice out-of-court settlement for $6 million. So, very briefly, I'm going to rush through this. In the UK, there's global drivers driven by the WT3 consortium, and in the UK there's BSI, who've got 2 parts of legislation, and then various companies have adopted, industry adopters of Microsoft are doing various things with accessibility, Apple, Oracle, and Google's doing a lot. They want to accessify all their Google applications. So what is the technology? And there's a list of stuff there that is out there. And even if you do all best efforts, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be compliant, because you might not be accessible for a particular disabled user, but it's all about best efforts. So the best practice is that as a website owner, you should make the effort to make your site or services compliant and not leave it up to the user. And very briefly, what we do, we produce something called Talklets, and there's a toolbar or toolbox, and then we've got a mobile client which reads SMS and emails, and we've got a thing called a T-browser, which is a proxy, which means the site doesn't have to do any modifications to their site, and we proxy it and add our technology to it. But there's maybe some slight issues there because there's out of RIP, but we won't go into that. And then we've got some interesting translation software, and we've got synthetic voices. And if we step through the rest of the slides, that just goes into more details on them. But but it is a software as a service, and it just brings up a little toolbar, and you can click on the bits to access the accessibility functions. But it's a global market. It's all about corporate social responsibility and diversity and best practice, and everyone should implement it on their websites. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Steve.